Welcome to the Geek 101 Podcast, episode 263, Tales of Arcadia. For the glory of Merlin, daylight is mine to command. I'm Ariel.
And I'm Andy Bowman.
And today we are talking about the trio of Netflix original series subtitled The Tales of Arcadia. Andy, these are a bunch of Netflix original programming produced by Guillermo Del Toro, featuring a small town named Arcadia. So, Andy, tell me what are the three shows, and then I guess I can recap what each of the three shows is supposed to be about, why we're doing, and what are the three shows, and why we're doing this now.
Okay, well, the three shows are TrollHunters, the first one, which is TrollHunters, Tales of Arcadia. Next is Three Below, Tales of Arcadia. And the final one is going to be Wizards, Tales of Arcadia.
Yeah, the final one will be coming out on August 7th. We are recording this on August 4th. This should come out on August 5th. Excuse me, do we know if that show is coming out all at once or episodically?
I believe it's coming out all at once. You know, it's the Netflix model. I don't see why it would change just for this.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with you. Hulu is more of the Hulu does it more often, releasing things weekly. Okay. So let me do a quick recap here on a synopsis of each of these series, or at least the two that we know of. This is a fantasy and sci-fi series. I think that is based off of pre-existing books. Is that correct, Andy?
Yes, they're pre-existing books that Del Toro co-wrote.
Okay. So this is, if I were to wager, this is something that was conceived in one of these smaller pages of the Guillermo Del Toro dream journal. One of the bigger ones is probably definitely Pan's Labyrinth. It's definitely The Shape of Water. And this one is just this kind of storytelling works better for a TV show. Let's make it animated. Let's make it for kids. But Andy, we've had recent discussions on the fact that we producers have such nebulous titles. We don't know what we really do. I think this is an exception because I think we can really see Guillermo del Toro's fingerprints all over this trio of series.
Yes. I believe, as Del Toro would put it, my fat little fingerprints are everywhere. Every other line out of Del Toro's mouth is a self-deprecating line about how he is fat.
Yeah, or how he was shunned and super nerdy as a kid. It's one of those two things. So we have TrollHunters, the original series, which kind of came out to no fanfare whatsoever. It features the main character, Jim Lake, and his best friend Toby, as they discover an amulet which provides Jim with a suit of armor and the title of Troll Hunter. And in this world of Arcadia, trolls are real. They are living, breathing beings made out of stone who live underneath the town. And the Troll Hunter is the designated guardian, the destined guardian of the trolls in Arcadia. This is the first time a Troll Hunter has been named a human, and that's where the series kind of starts off. Three Below is a more sci-fi series where in TrollHunters they introduced two quote-unquote foreign exchange students, which we learn are aliens. And this is such a they're aliens and they live in Arcadia, and it focuses on their adventures in it. And then the upcoming show Wizards is kind of bringing everything to a head and has the clash of sci-fi and fantasy with trolls and aliens and wizards and all of that jazz. This show sounds bonkers. When you get everything, when you and we didn't mention a ton of stuff that would be spoilery. We're not going to spoil anything on this podcast. But this series sounds bonkers. It sounds exactly like how I describe Pacific Rim, where this is Guillermo Del Toro sitting on his like childhood home floor playing with action figures, and he somehow mixes up his elves and trolls with his alien and robots, and he decided to make a TV show out of it.
Right. It's really fascinating because one, I know from other podcasts that Del Toro has done that he owns the house next to his house just for all of his stuff.
That is a very Guillermo Del Toro thing to hear.
Yeah. And it's very much like he came up with this world where there is sci-fi and there is fantasy, and he decided, oh, I need to justify them interacting with each other by just having two separate series, one focused on the lore of the fantasy world, and then another one focused on the lore of the sci-fi world, and then bringing all my toys together.
Yeah, he was quoted, and I don't have the direct quote. I left the page up on my other computer, basically saying this was a dream of his as a kid where he always thought if something fantastical were to happen, it would always happen in his town. And that's kind of why all of this crazy stuff is happening only in Arcadia.
It really is interesting. It goes also back to the idea of like, you know, the Stephen King idea of like Derry or something, Derry,
yeah,
Maine.
Yeah, that's what I thought of.
Or even Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where their town is just on a portal to hell, so everything bad does come through their town.
So one of the calling cards of this Tales of Arcadia series is that there is an incredible roster of voice talent and famous voice talent on here. But the first one we want to talk about before we get into like mention a bunch of other names is that Anton Yelchin, the young man who passed away a couple of years ago, who played Chekhov in the Star Trek 2007 reboot, voices the main character of Jim Lake Jr., and he passed away before this came out. And so there is a bit of an emotional toll watching this series, knowing that he passed away before this work was finished and before he got to even see it.
Yeah. And Anton Yelchin, I mean, should be known by every nerd for his role in so many things, but also just for his Star Trek role. I recently watched the documentary about him, and it's fascinating stuff. He seemed to be a really, really beloved person, and I know I really loved him as an actor.
Yeah, something I weirdly enjoyed watching him in was Odd Thomas.
Dude, yes, Odd Thomas is actually way better than you would think. It's a lot more fun. It's it's a Dean Koontz adaptation, but it's a kind of like a Constantine almost.
Yeah, I've read the book. The book's not great, but I enjoyed the movie a lot, and I really enjoyed seeing him. I hoped for better things. Before he passed away, he was in, was it Green Room?
Yeah, he was in Green Room, which was great. I've got his list up here. He was also in a movie called Thoroughbreds, which is creepy and unsettling.
It seemed that he was poised to break out into stardom before his untimely passing. The show, I think, does handle his passing really well. There was a moment where there's like a natural change in the main character's voice, for lack of, to not spoil anything. And he is eventually replaced by Emil Hirsch, who is not an unfamous person, right? He was in Friday Night Lights. He was in that awful X-Men movie. He was in a very, very big Call of Duty commercial. But I guess enough about Anton Yelchin. He was a great voice actor. He was great in this. He was great in many other things. But let's move on to kind of the larger picture here. This show has an incredible amount of familiar voices. Andy, why don't you give us some of them?
Okay. Kelsey Grammer, Clancy Brown, Tom Hiddleston is very briefly in the first episode, Lena Headey, Tom Kenny, Tatiana Maslany, so many voice actors, but of course Ariel, our beloved, probably geek royalty, Ron Perlman, and favorite of our show, Stephen Yeun.
Yeah, so this is an interesting point here. Stephen Yeun plays, oh gosh, what's his name?
Steve Palchuk.
Steve Palchuk, right? Who is not only white, he's blonde, and he's the bully. And it's such a weird, like, different thing. They give him a little bit of a lisp at times, if I'm not mistaken. But it is interesting to see kind of that decision, right? And it really looks like they were doing, quote unquote, like colorblind or casting. But also, I'd like to transition this into the larger look at the show's diversity. There are plenty of characters who are, not just white. I guess our two leads are white, and that is a little frustrating. But Claire, who's is like the third lead, I would say, or third billing, is Hispanic. I forget her last name in the show. There's, go ahead.
Nunez.
Okay. There are plenty of other characters. The three below aliens are played by Tatiana Maslany and Diego Luna. There are several Asian characters who, I forget the character's name, but you do see Kevin's mom from Supernatural voices one of the Asian characters. So it's kind of one of those things where there really is no excuse, and there's especially no excuse in animation, where you can make the character any color you want. And you can hire, anyone who can do half decent voice work. So I really like the diversity in the voice cast, more diversity in the voice cast than a show like Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Right. And Del Toro himself does pop in as a voice actor.
Who is he?
He's the orthodontist.
Oh,
he's Claire's father, I believe.
No, Claire's father and the orthodontist are two different. Unless he does both.
Okay, but he is the orthodontist.
Okay, and I mean there is a couple of voice acting royalty here. Frank Welker, who many people
fans will remember from the one episode of Supernatural where they cross over with Scooby-Doo.
Right. Fred Welker plays Freddie Jones from the original Scooby-Doo. He currently is the voice for Scooby, and most people would recognize him from the credits of the Transformers movies, where he is the voice of Megatron. So you have him, you have Mark Hamill playing a role. You have Ron Perlman is like one of the first voices you hear. Clancy Brown, of course, also is another voice you hear very, very often. So a lot of talent. And I think that is where Del Toro's impact is most felt. It's in the fact that attaching his name to something like this means it has a sense of credibility to it. Unlike something like, I don't know, Avatar, like when Avatar: The Last Airbender first came out, it did not have the type of cachet from a production standpoint that this show does.
Tom Hiddleston, though, was such a big name to be just a very small role at the beginning, but that was a big deal. Clearly, this is because of his work with Del Toro and Crimson Peak.
Yes. Who is he replaced by? Do you have that up right now?
Yeah, he was replaced by James Purefoy.
James Purefoy, yeah. So who was not... is not, an unknown actor. Yeah. So lots of really great voice talent. But let's get into kind of the meat of what this show is about. What would you say is the vibe of the Tales of Arcadia series? At least TrollHunters.
TrollHunters, I would say, is it's like a Gravity Falls meets Stranger Things.
Okay, I tend to think there's a little bit more of a hero's journey in TrollHunters than there is in something like Gravity Falls and Stranger Things.
Right, and I definitely agree with you. I'm trying to think without saying Buffy, because I don't want to send more people to Buffy, but it is a very human chosen one.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I really, it's got a bit of a Swords and Shields vibe, or what is it, Swords and Staffs or something like that, right? Like magic and all of that. That exists in this world, and in how it kind of plays and melds and fuses with the modern world. But also, I really enjoy the kind of youthful tone that this show takes on, and how it addresses and how it works around with its teenage characters.
Yeah. Weirdly, Ariel, I know we had a discussion. Animorphs.
It reminds you of Animorphs? I've never read any of those, so I can't comment on that.
It's a little bit of just the kids having a secret identity, double life, having to keep that secret, living in suburbia, dealing with other things, but also just, it's, it really feels like a kind of like The Runaways.
Sure. Yeah. I think the double life aspect of it is actually really, really important. It is reminiscent of something like, let's say, Spider-Man, where
absolutely.
Jim cannot balance his responsibilities as a hero and his regular everyday life. His relationships suffer, his grades suffer, his schooling, his relationship with his mom. And so I think that's a great example. And I think that's probably why I was so drawn to this. We don't get that in the modern Spider-Man movies. That is not a concern for Tom Holland's Peter Parker.
Right. And it's barely a concern in Into the Spider-Verse for Miles Morales. You know, they kind of discuss it a little bit. It's there. It's just you never have enough time to really sink your teeth into it.
Yeah, where you see, I think for Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, it was probably a little too much, where his life was so incredibly terrible. But that's how it is in the comic books, where Peter Parker just cannot catch a break. And I think a lot of people relate to that, where they're overwhelmed and life is coming at them too fast, and relationships suffer because you're so busy. And I think I've really missed that sort of story that we're being told here in TrollHunters.
Right. And we're also, it's shown in TrollHunters that all their characters have their own stressors and feelings. The sidekick character Tobias has his own feelings about his parents not being alive. The character Claire has a feeling of needing to protect her baby sister. Stephen Yeun's bully character even has his own arc and dealing with the fact that his mom is dating the coach.
Yeah, there's such a great exploration of the lives of these characters. We even have like a Breakfast Club episode recreation in this series. It's so much fun, and the original TrollHunters quote unquote series runs 3 seasons, and so it's not a short journey. Even though I ended up watching it all in one, like in 3 days. Yeah, but it does take its time with its characters. I don't remember feeling that the main character's journey from novice to hero, from zero to hero, so to speak, was unearned in a way that I think a lot of TV shows do it, where one day he is Jason Todd, and the next day he is like Robin, right? Where one day he is a young Bruce Wayne, and the next day he is good at. Or I think that one of the best examples of this is like Harley Quinn, where like one day she's a psychiatrist in an asylum, and the next day she's like fighting Batman hand to hand. So it does take its time in showing you that this does not happen overnight. That being a hero is not all that like what it's chalked up to be. He makes mistakes. He struggles. He loses fights. There are plenty of consequences as the show goes along, which I think a less mature kids show would kind of gloss over.
Yeah. Like with a lot of the kids shows, there's never any sense of real danger, right? Of course, they're never going to hurt the main character permanently, or there's not going to really be a loss. It even might just be a draw, a consistent draw over time. That is not the case here. There are some straight up losses. There are some straight up character deaths, which, whew.
Yeah, in a weird way, this show does that better than something like Arrow does, where the continuous threat of I'm gonna kill you, no, I'm gonna kill you. And then the fact that like its characters just continuously survive and survive and survive. But this show in the opening episode starts with someone's death. And it just, even though it is a kid's show, and I don't think it really ever moves beyond being a kid's show or a kid's story, it's still a very, very good one.
Yeah, that's like one of the things is it is rated TVY7, and I don't know how they got away with that rating, really. This is like a TV PG or that kind of show, but the Y7 is always like Power Rangers level.
Yeah.
And this is a little bit more than that. There's a lot going on. There's also some trust in the audience to really pay attention to details and remember things. There's one episode where it's kind of just going about the episode paces, and all of a sudden Stephen Yeun's character has his character and the friend who's usually the constantly bullied, they have a moment. It comes out of nowhere, and you don't know why. It's really jarring. And then the next episode takes place completely from Stephen Yeun's perspective and explains what just happened.
Yeah, I do love that they decide to take time to give the other point of views in this town, because Del Toro's vision for the show is that this is a town where all the weird stuff happens. It is not the story of... It's not solely the story of Jim Lake, the troll hunter hero. It is the story of the town of Arcadia and how each of them struggles, or how each of them is affected, and how the town is affected in different ways. There are, you're always confused when you're a kid and you watch Power Rangers and buildings are destroyed and like nobody cares the next day, right? People are kidnapped, but nobody talks about it. This show handles that, and it handles it really well. It handles it better than something like Justice League and Batman v Superman. It understands the real world implications of what might be happening in here, and it gives consequences. And we talk about that all the time. It's what's missing from a lot of fantasy and fantasy works and whatnot. And I think it's Del Toro's like commitment to strong storytelling that maybe shapes that kind of idea, or shapes and gives this show that specific structure.
Right. At the very beginning of the first episode, you see a character die. It's a suicide. It's for the greater good kind of suicide, but the character willingly chooses death. It's Tom Hiddleston's character, so it's the previous troll hunter. But we also meet. We get a very quick understanding of who Jim is by showing that he wakes up, cooks breakfast, cooks a expertly crafted meal, cooks lunch for his friend. You see, it does so much telling about who Jim is, just showing you.
Yeah. The characters in the show are not blank slates.
Right. And he meets his friend Tobes, and you see that Tobes is a fat kid, and I'm very as someone who is a very chubby kid, I'm very sensitive to how they handle fat jokes in shows like this, because it's usually low-hanging fruit, kids show. And it's impressive to me. Well, it's probably also a Del Toro insert character, knowing Del Toro, but it's impressive to me that his friend has confidence, and there are a few fat jokes, but they never feel particularly mean-spirited at him because he is fat.
Yeah, this character reminds me of, was it Ned in the Spider-Man?
Yeah,
in the new Spider-Man movies. He has his own agency, he has his own motivations, he has his own relationships. And while I don't particularly love those movies, that is a positive aspect of that series, where Ned is his own character. He does not exist to be a punching bag. And so that Tobes exists with his own agency as well. Let's move on to what do we think will draw people to this show if we're trying to convince them to watch it?
Okay, if I'm trying to convince you to watch it, if you enjoyed Avatar: The Last Airbender recently, this is a great taste of something similar but different.
Yeah, I like to say, I like to imagine in my head a scale, and there's a line between like something is for kids and something is good, and that diagonal line on a bar graph, on a line graph, right? Avatar: The Last Airbender it's way up there as being just good, right? Who cares if it's a kid's show? I think this is just a very good kids show, as opposed to like a great show. Something like Avatar: The Last Airbender is. I don't know, if Avatar: The Last Airbender is a 10, I would probably put this at like a 7 or a 6 on that scale. Still above that median over there, but I really enjoy this. I think this is in a lot of ways, this is a very typical, it's a mixture of the hero's journey and like small town America, like friend group that you see in like a Stephen King book, right? In Dairy Maine. I think it doesn't really break the mold in any way, but I think it's still very good, and I think it's just done really well for the genre that it's in.
Right. And another like layer I want to add to this, though, is that the first season is 26 episodes. The second and third season are 13 episodes each. And this is something that I think a lot of shows go through, where their first season, they have a bit more of a tight control. The studio has a bit more of a tight control. There's a bit more nebulousness in what it wants to do. The second and third seasons, I think, are much stronger and are focused more on a singular villain instead of a villain of the episode type deal.
Yeah, the storytelling does shift. It does focus. I really enjoy it. I'm not quite sure how much of it is shaped by the death of Anton Yelchin. I did read an article saying Del Toro was not going to allow them to re-record any of his lines because Anton Yelchin was so proud of what he was doing in this work, and they should be. I think it's really good. I think the show is excellent.
And just to show you how much they've pre-planned this, Yelchin, even though the first episode has his in memoriam, for our, dedicated to our favorite troll hunter, Anton Yelchin, he goes through to the end of season 2. Yeah.
So they did a lot. It was very well planned. I think they did have that break from 2 to 3 because of this, maybe because of the circumstances they were in.
Well, I also Three Below, both seasons of that are only 13 episodes. I really think Netflix started seeing the strength of a 13 episode season and just letting the creators tell a story instead of trying to make 26 episodes for syndication, of SpongeBob that are loosely related.
Right. The shift in storytelling, I think, in TV as a whole has been for the better. Do you have anything else to say about this before we get into a full on grade and maybe not grade, but as we wrap up the conversation?
I say give it a shot if you are a parent. Definitely give it a shot with your kids. I think you're gonna like it. I'm becoming a parent later this year, and I'm also putting a lot of thought into what am I looking forward to showing my child for the first time, and this is high up on that list.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, this is very.
And even if you're not a parent, if you just are somebody who is okay giving a slightly more childish show the time of day, do this. The first 3 episodes flow together very well. It's clear that this is like the movie that Nickelodeon would have like a 1 hour special on the first time it aired, kind of thing. It's very clear they all flow in together. Give it a shot. I think the humor gets a lot better. Everything about the show gets better as it goes on.
Yeah, I really loved. I love Enrique who you meet later on in the series. No spoiler there. He's a fan favorite. Really quick, I think if you like blank, you'll like TrollHunters. I think Avatar: The Last Airbender is one that's up there. Maybe not from an Asian kind of mysticism perspective, but from a hero's journey perspective. I think The Dragon Prince, if you like that vibe of Dungeons and Dragons and swords and fantasy, this will be very much up your wheelhouse. I think Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, which is the official manga adaptation of Full Metal Alchemist, I think that's maybe even a better show, better story than Avatar, and is also a 10 in terms of this is a great show, not just that happens to be for kids.
Speaking of which, for Full Metal Alchemist, I've recently just finished a rewatch of it with my friend who does not like anime. He really, really enjoyed Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood.
Yeah, I think TrollHunters is more of a traditional shonen anime story tone than Full Metal Alchemist is.
Yeah, because each of the sidekicks gets their own special abilities and a weapon, and they get power upgrades.
Right. Yeah. And he has to upgrade in order to defeat the final boss, and he has to go transformations and blah blah blah. I would very much say that is this is more if you like Naruto and Bleach and Fairy Tail, this is also in that wheelhouse.
Yeah. If you like Ultimate Spider-Man, the comics, this is right up there in that wheelhouse.
Very
as well.
much so. Yeah. That we talked about that responsibility between that split in focus between having to be a normal kid and having to be a hero. I really enjoy that aspect of TrollHunters.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk a little bit about Three Below, Ariel.
So I have not seen Three Below. So give us a little bit tonally, what to expect, things like that.
So for Three Below, I've seen most of the first season and then got distracted with other things. It is very, very much tonally the same thing. It is visually more focused on the sci-fi aspect, of course, because Tatiana Maslany and Diego Luna play royalty that escape from a planet for reasons that they get into pretty early on. They are guided by Nick Offerman, who is their protector, bodyguard, very serious, Nick Offerman-esque. I mean, he's Ron Swanson in space.
Right.
And they land in this world. They have to pretend to be humans, and they meet some friends. They deal with the thing. It's very much more of the same. But what's beautiful is that by the TrollHunters doesn't outstay its welcome. You know, it ends after 3 seasons. You want more. You get more of this world. There are many, many crossover characters. The sidekick character Toby is around. Stephen Yeun's character is around. It's very much the same world. You get to see little nudge, nudge, wink, wink nods, and it's just fun.
So you're saying, I think tonally and humor and all that, it's very similar, but maybe the subgenre is so different.
Right. Well, I would say like everything's the same except the characters and the visuals. And that's only the visuals when they're dealing with their own sci-fi thing. There's also a bit of a Diego Luna's character, Krell, is him and his sister, Aja, they both love doing like music. So there's a lot of electronica music styling and references and a bit of a feel. It's vaporwave almost. You've got your purples and blues, and they really like using that. It really works.
Yeah. So I think that is plenty that we have discussed to see if you'd be interested in catching up, to watch Wizards Tales of Arcadia as it airs this week. Perhaps Andy and I will do a quick review of that season when we are both finished with it. Andy, any final thoughts on the Tales of Arcadia series?
I mean, if any of this appeals to you, if you're a kid waiting to go back to school in the next 2 weeks, this is a great use of your time. This is something that you can do in a few days. I mean, it's a heckin' ride.
All right, let's move on to homework. Andy, what do you got?
Okay, for homework, I have in my hand a book called Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff. The HBO series starts August 16th. It is, so far, I'm about halfway through. It's really fun. I really like the world that they're building. I really like the way that the characters deal with Lovecraftian and cosmic horrors. It's really good. So give that a shot. It's set in the 1950s, kind of across the entire United States. It's basically about a black family that's dealing with the horrible inherent racism of America, but also dealing with magic and elder gods, and as the characters say, Shoggoths, which are a monster from Lovecraft lore.
All right. I think we're both very interested in what that show was going to look like coming out on HBO Max, I believe. My homework this week is a podcast I just started listening to called But Why Though? The podcast, where they basically, it's just another like great pop cultural geeky podcast where they talk about different subjects every week. But some of the recent episodes are Full Metal Alchemist or Michael Jordan or Friday the 13th and stuff like that. So that's just another good podcast led by people of color, led by women of color. Just another podcast for your geeky ears. All right, Andy, let's sign off here. Where can people find you online?
You can find me online on Twitter or Letterboxd at Hebrews Pale Ale, and you can also find my other podcast, Monkey Off My Backlog, at Monkey Backlog on Twitter.
All right, you can find me at Portly Island Boy. You can find us at Geek101 Podcast on Twitter and Facebook. Email us, geek101pod@gmail.com. That's the way out for today. Class dismissed.